Splitting. One of the primary features of both narcissistic and borderline pathology is a defensive process called splitting, in which the other person in the relationship is perceived in polarized extremes of being either entirely perfect or and idealized, or as being entirely bad and devalued. The origins of this characteristic personality trait for both the narcissistic and the borderline styles of personality organization is found in the underlying structures of the attachment system. Narcissistic and borderline personality dynamics represent the coalesced product of underlying patterns of attachment expectations. The particular type of attachment pattern that results in the formation of a narcissistic borderline personality organization is called a disorganized attachment. In this type of attachment, the child cannot develop a coherent strategy for forming an attachment bond to the parent. A variety of distorted parenting practices can give rise to a disorganized attachment in the child. Among the causal origins of a disorganized attachment is a frightening parent who is simultaneously both a source of threat to the child and a source of parental protection. Beck et al. 2004 described the research findings on this association of borderline personality disorder and childhood disorganized attachment. Beck et al. 2004, the site for that is Beck, Freeman, Davis, and Associates, 2004, Cognitive Therapy of Personality Disorders, 2nd edition, New York, Guilford. They describe the research findings on this association of borderline personality development and childhood disorganized attachment. Various studies have found that patients with BPD, borderline personality disorder, are characterized by disorganized attachment representations. Such attachment representations appear to be typical for persons with unresolved childhood traumas, especially when parental figures were involved, with direct frightening behavior by the parent. Disorganized attachment is considered to result from an unresolved situation for the child when the parent is at the same time the source of fright, as well as the potential haven of safety. Van Ischendorn, Schugenkel, and Bakerman's Cronenberg, 1999, page 226, at page 191 of Beck et al.'s 2004 book on cognitive therapy for personality disorders. When a child is presented with a threat, the attachment system motivates the child to flee from the threat and seek the protection of the parent. However, when the parent is at the same time the source of the threat and the source of protection from threat, this presents an unresolvable conflict for the child. When the parent is both the threat and the haven of safety from threat, the child's motivation system for both attachment, bonding, and avoidance are simultaneously activated. The child is simultaneously motivated both to flee from the parent, who poses the threat, and to seek protective bonding with the parent, who is simultaneously the source of the threat. This creates intense yet incompatible motivational directives, both to flee from the parent and to seek attachment bonding with the same parental figure, who is also the source of threat. Chronic exposure to this unresolvable form of motivational conflict toward the parent creates a disorganized attachment to the parent, in which the child is unable to develop any coherent strategy for forming a viable attachment bond to the parent. This underlying disorganized attachment pattern, then, coalesces during adolescence and early adulthood into stable, albeit pathological, narcissistic and borderline personality dynamics. The splitting defense of polarized extremes of judgment regarding relationships develops as a means of resolving the intense motivational conflict created by a parent who is simultaneously a source of threat and of protection. In order to resolve this unresolvable conflict, the brain neurologically splits, quote unquote, these two motivational systems into completely separate networks, one entirely dedicated to avoidance and one entirely dedicated to attachment bonding. This is accomplished by completely cross-inhibiting the activity of these networks so that only one or the other motivational network can be active at any one time. When the attachment bonding motivating system is active, the avoidance motivating system is completely inhibited. It is completely shut off. Alternatively, when the avoidance motivation system is active, it entirely inhibits the attachment bonding motivation system. Only one or the other of these two systems can be active at a time. This resolves the conflict in motivational directives. However, the splitting of these two networks into separate systems, i.e. entirely cross-inhibiting the activity of these systems, also leads to extreme polarization in the perceptions of relationships. When the motivating systems for attachment bonding and avoidance have been split, only one or the other of these two motivating systems, either for attachment bonding or for avoidance, can be active at any one time. As a result, perceptions of other people become polarized into extremes. Other people are seen as being either entirely good, i.e. the attachment bonding system is active and the avoidance system is entirely shut down, neurologically inhibited, or entirely bad, i.e. the avoidance motivating system is active and the attachment bonding system is entirely shut down, neurologically inhibited. As a result of splitting, the child is able to resolve the psychological conflict of simultaneously incompatible motivations and achieve a single motivational directive, but at the cost of nuanced and blended interpretations of relationships. The process of splitting occurs at the neurological level of the brain. The splitting of these two motivational networks is achieved through a complete neural cross-inhibition of the attachment bonding and avoidance motivating systems. When one motivating system is on, the other motivating system is entirely turned off, inhibited. In normal development, both the attachment bonding and the avoidance motivational systems can be on simultaneously with only a slight inhibition from one motivational network on the activity of the other. The simultaneous activation of the attachment bonding and avoidance motivation systems allows us to experience blended perceptions of other people as processing both positive attachment bonding motivation and negative avoidance motivation qualities at the same time. There is a slight cross-inhibition of these systems so that if we like someone, i.e. an attachment bonding motivation, we are more likely to notice positive traits of the person and minimize negative qualities, called a positive halo effect. On the other hand, if we dislike someone, i.e. an avoidance motivation, then we are more likely to notice and highlight the person's negative qualities and minimize their positive traits, called a negative halo effect. Despite this slight cross-inhibition of the attachment bonding and avoidance motivational systems, in normal range psychosocial development, both systems can be active at the same time, which allows us to have nuanced and blended perceptions of other people. However, as a result of the intense simultaneous activation of both attachment bonding and avoidance motivating systems associated with the formation of disorganized attachment in early childhood, which in turn leads to the formation of narcissistic and borderline personality traits during later adolescence and early adulthood. The intensity of the simultaneous activation of these incompatible motivational systems for bonding and avoidance leads to a psychological splitting in the functioning of these systems. This involves their complete neurological cross-inhibition so that only one or the other of these two motivational systems can be active at any one time. The child's exposure to a simultaneously threatening and protective parent creates both the child's disorganized attachment and neuropsychological process of splitting. The disorganized attachment coalesces during adolescence and young adulthood into stable narcissistic and borderline personality characteristics, which is why splitting into polarized extremes of perception is a characteristic of both narcissistic and borderline personality structures. Both the personality pathology and the splitting dynamic have their origins in the same parent-child attachment trauma that produced a disorganized attachment. At the neurobiological level, splitting represents the complete neurological separation of the motivations for attachment bonding with a protective parent from the avoidance motivations to flee from the threatening, dangerous, and quote-unquote abusive parent. As a result of splitting, the child's internalized representational network for the parent becomes split into two components: representations for the all-good, nurturing, and protective parent who trigger the activation of the child's attachment bonding motivational system, and representational networks for an all bad, dangerous, and quote-unquote abusive parent who represents the activation of the child's avoidance motivating system. In order to create a coherent and consistent motivational directive toward the parent, the internalized representation for the all-good, nurturing, and quote-unquote protective parent, and its associated attachment bonding motivation cannot be active at the same time as the child's internalized representation for the all-bad, dangerous, and quote-unquote abusive parent, and its associated avoidance motivation. Only one or the other of these motivational systems and its associated internalized representation for the parent as either the all-good parent, the internalized representation for the all-good, nurturing, and quote-unquote protective parent, and its associated attachment bonding motivation cannot be active at the same time as the child's internalized representation for the all-bad, dangerous, and quote-unquote abusive parent, and its associated avoidance motivation. Only one or the other of these motivational systems and its associated internalized representation for the parent as either the all-good, quote-unquote protective parent or the all-bad, quote, abusive parent, close quote, can be active at any one time. This is achieved by a complete neurological cross-inhibition of these motivational systems and the complete separation of the representational networks for the all-good, quote, protective, unquote, parent for the all-bad, from the all-bad, quote-unquote, abusive parent. While this resolves a psychological conflict by creating incompatible motivational directives, it comes at the cost of having blended and nuanced perceptions of others. Perhaps perceptions of the relationship partner, i.e. the attachment figure, become polarized into extremes of the other person being either all good, an idealized relationship partner, or the all bad and entirely devalued relationship partner. For the more borderline style personality disorganization, the all-good polarity represents an idealized, quote-unquote, perfect love, in which the other person represents a completely attuned, perfectly empathic, and totally dedicated other. When the relationship partner fails to live up to this idealized standard, the neurological networks within the brain switch entirely to the avoidance motivation system, in which the relationship partner, i.e. the attachment figure, becomes completely devalued as the embodiment of malevolence and, quote, open quote, abusive, close quote, evil. For the narcissistic style personality, the idealized extreme in this polarized perception of others is the adoring other who is a perfect narcissistic reflection of the grandiose self-perception of the narcissistic personality. The other person in the relationship is of no intrinsic value, but is only of value for the, quote, narcissistic supply, close quote, of reflective adoration that they provide to the narcissistic personality. Unlike the borderline style personality, the narcissistic style personality is not seeking perfect love. Instead, the narcissistic style personality is seeking the perfectly adoring self-reflection of the narcissistic personality, which provides continual, quote, narcissistic supply, close quote, to the fragile narcissistic defense against the core belief regarding the narcissist's fundamental self-inadequacy. If the relationship partner fails to provide this source of continual, quote, narcissistic supply, close quote, then the avoidance motivating system is triggered and other persons become the object of dismissive contempt and angry onslaughts. We call this the narcissistic rage. The splitting dynamic, characteristic of narcissistic and borderline psychological processes, creates dichotomous black and white thinking in which other people are perceived as either all good, idealized, or as all bad, and are entirely devalued. Ambivalence is an impossibility within the complete neurological cross-inhibition of the attachment bonding and avoidance motivational systems associated with narcissistic and borderline processes. This is important to understand regarding the manifestation of attachment-based parental alienation, quote-unquote. Psychological ambivalence is a neurological impossibility for the narcissistic/borderline personality. When the family transitions from an intact family structure united by the marital couple to a separated family structure united by the child, the spouse becomes an ex-spouse, i.e. activation of the avoidance motivating system, but remains a current parent, i.e. attachment bonding system. This represents a transition in the family from fundamental consistency in both the spousal and parental role relationship, i.e. attachment, bonding, motivational systems for both roles, to one of disparate spousal and parental role relationships. The spouse becomes an ex-spouse, but remains a bonded parent. In the intact family, the husband is also the father, the wife is also the mother. However, in a separated family structure, the former spouse has become an ex-husband or an ex-wife, yet remains an active and affectionately bonded father or mother for the child. The ex-husband does not also become an ex-father, nor does the ex-wife become an ex-mother. With the divorce, the spousal and parental role relationships are no longer consistent. This inconsistency in role relationships is not a problem for normal brains in which both the attachment, bonding, and avoidance motivating systems can be active simultaneously. In a normal brain, the activation of the avoidance motivating system relative to the ex-spouse still allows the attachment, bonding, motivating system to be active so that the role of the ex-spouse as a continuing bonded mother or father to the child can still be recognized. The ex-spouse, i.e. the avoidance motivating system, can still be recognized as currently bonded to the child, i.e. the attachment motivating system. However, within the black and white dichotomous splitting processes of the narcissistic borderline parent, this type of inconsistency in relationships cannot be perceived because of the complete neurological cross-inhibition of the attachment bonding motivational system from the avoidance motivational system. The complete cross-inhibition of the attachment bonding and avoidance motivational networks prevents, at a neurological level, the ability to perceive blended and nuanced role relationships. Either one or the other of these motivational systems can be active, but not both. Perception is completely polarized. When the avoidance motivating system is activated, relative to the spouse becoming an ex-spouse, this entirely inhibits the activation of the attachment bonding motivating system. The narcissistic borderline personality cannot perceive the continued parental attachment bond of the targeted parent to the children. With the divorce, when the husband becomes an ex-husband, he must also become an ex-father. When the wife becomes an ex-wife, she must also become an ex-mother as well. Within the neurobiological process of splitting, ambiguity in role relationships is a neurological impossibility. Furthermore, when the husband or wife is no longer the source of narcissistic or borderline supply as the regulatory object totally dedicated to the regulation of the emotional and psychological state of the narcissistic borderline parent, then the husband or wife becomes entirely devalued as being all bad, evil, and quote-unquote abusive person. In the brain of the narcissistic borderline personality, the ex-spouse switches from the attachment bonding motivational system to the complete activation of the avoidance motivating system. Since the neurological substrate of splitting cannot accommodate to inconsistency, the all bad, evil, and quote-unquote abusive ex-husband or ex-wife also becomes the all bad, evil, quote-unquote abusive ex-father or ex-mother as well. By its very nature, the intense neural cross-inhibition of attachment bonding and avoidance motivational networks inherent to the splitting dynamic are designed to eliminate inconsistency and ambiguity at the neurological level by creating a single certainty, either bonding or avoidance, but never both simultaneously. The neurological substrate of the splitting dynamic requires that the ex-husband become an ex-father and that the ex-wife become an ex-mother. It is a neurologically imposed imperative that accepts no other alternative. This is why adding narcissistic and borderline pathology to a cross-generational coalition transmutes the already pathological cross-generational coalition into a particularly malignant and virulent form that seeks to entirely terminate the other parent's relationship with the child. The neurological imperative imposed by the splitting dynamic makes attachment-based parental alienation, quote-unquote, fundamentally different from the other forms of problematic parenting. Cross-generational parent-child coalitions that do not include parental, narcissistic, or borderline pathology are still highly problematic family dynamics and will result in mild to moderate cases of negative parental influence that create increased parent-child conflict between the child and the targeted parent. However, the addition of narcissistic and borderline psychopathology, particularly the addition of the splitting dynamic, transforms an already pathological cross-generational coalition into a particularly malignant and virulent form of pathology that is lethal to the other parent's relationship with the child. The developmental challenge of the family surrounding divorce is to transition from an intact family structure united by the marital unit to a separated family structure united by the child and by the continuing parental roles as mother and father with the child. However, the neurological imperative for consistency imposed by the splitting dynamic of the narcissistic borderline parent prevents the family from making this transition. The continuing parental role of the targeted parent with the child cannot be perceived by the narcissistic borderline parent because the attachment bonding system that would be necessary to recognize the targeted parent's continuing parental role with the child is being entirely cross-inhibited by the activation of the avoidance motivating system in the brain of the narcissistic borderline parent. The narcissistic borderline parent will, with near certainty, triangulate this child into the spousal conflict through the formation of a cross-generational coalition with the child against the other parent in order to stabilize the fragile personality structure of the narcissistic borderline parent that is threatened with collapse as a consequence of the divorce. This is the family systems analysis, level of analysis. The addition of parental narcissistic and borderline pathology to the cross-generational coalition, particularly surrounding the splitting dynamic, will transmute the pathology of the cross-generational coalition into a particularly malignant and virulent form that seeks to entirely terminate the other parent's relationship with the child, i.e. to make the ex-husband and ex-father, the ex-wife and ex-mother. That would be the personality level of analysis for parental alienation. And then finally, the attachment and neurological substrate basis of parental alienation is that the neurological substrate of the splitting dynamic that is inherent to the pathology of both narcissistic and borderline personality structures will tolerate no other alternative. And that was pages 48 through 56 of C.A. Childress, Dr. C.A. Childress's attachment-based model for parental alienation called Foundations. And I'll read some more of this to you as it comes along. It's very interesting. Not sure what to make of it just yet, but it's very interesting.